Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Tucker. I will be your moderator for this evening. I am so excited to present to you a great friend and colleague, Dr. Shalu Paul, who will be talking to us tonight about scleral multifocal optics. Dr. Paul started and runs a 5OD practice in Toronto, Canada, which is home to every subspecialty within optometry. She is the co-editor of Mastering Myopia, Myopia in Practice researcher, and co-founder of the Canadian Contact Lens Academy and the Staple Workshop Program. She lectures globally and continues to be published while working with many industry partners for the betterment of the profession through education. She's been honored with the CLCS Achievement Award for her educational contributions to the industry and awarded the Legends Award by the American Optometric Association. She was the first Canadian chair of the AOA Contact Lens and Cornea section and the first Canadian selected as a U.S. Contact Lens Institute visionary. Recently, she graduated from the Global Healthcare Leadership Program from Harvard Medical School. Wow, Dr. Paul, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All of her financial disclosures have been mitigated. So for those of you that are new to our webinar, it's just a few little housekeeping things. So please feel free to put any of your questions in the Q&A feature or the chat feature. We will be sharing them with Dr. Paul at the end of the webinar. We won't be interrupting her during her talk. In order to receive credit, you must remain online for 50 minutes. Attendees are welcome but not obligated to stay at the end for the Q&A, and course handouts can be found on the SLS website library page. One new thing this year for the SLS webinars is that in order to get instant credit, you will need to make sure you have the OE Tracker app. You can get it in the Apple Store or in the Google Play Store. All you have to do at the end of the webinar is to open up the app, verify that your personal information is correct, then touch the scan QR code, and then your camera will open and you can scan the QR code. Do not worry if you don't do this, if you're technically challenged like I was a little earlier, we will email you your certificates within 2 weeks. All right, that's all I have. Dr. Paul, it is all yours.
Thank you so much. And let me just, Ashley, if you could stop sharing your slides, then I can share mine. There we go. Thank you. Perfect. There we go. Okay, we are up and running. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you. And thank you, Ashley, for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this talk. It's funny when I start talking about multifocals with in front of a crowd, the first question I ask is, who likes to fit multifocals? And usually there's like 2 or 3 people that raise their hand. And then I ask of those people, who likes to fit scleral multifocals? And the hands go all down. And I'm hoping by the end of this lecture that more hands want to go up and more people are excited to try this. And I hope I can try and simplify this for you a little bit so it doesn't seem as intimidating or as daunting as it could potentially appear. Here are my disclosures, and here's just a photo of my current practice that we're at right now. Guys, we all know what the benefits of scleral lenses are. I'm not going to go through this. You know how helpful they can be to your patients and what great things they can do to help improve comfort and vision and help with dryness. We also know how great multifocals are and how they help us with being free, hands-free, being more functional, feeling not so old by having to hold things further out or to take glasses on and off. It's just it's a continuation of our natural viewing process that we all want to be able to have. But when you actually combine the two of these technologies, being the multifocals and the scleral lenses, you now open yourself up to a whole world of benefit that you can give to your patients. Think about those dry eye patients there. Think about those keratoconic patients. They do become presbyopic as well. And so being able to give them options other than just readers over top of their scleral lenses, that's huge and that's powerful. So how do you do that, right? Well, let's talk about that. When we think about the scleral multifocal designs, when we were fitting GPs originally, we know about simultaneous vision designs, right? We've got center near, center distance. We have aspheric designs that gradually change from distance near or vice versa. We have ring patterns where we can have alternating powers of prescription. We can have, an increase in this ring power lots of different options. With scleral and GP lenses, we know that we can work with both the front surface of the lens, the back surface, or we can have different optics on both that are enhancing each other. The one thing that's different with scleral lenses is that we do not have translating lenses, because the beauty of multifocal lenses is that they are staying put. You don't have movement when you blink. They're not rotating and spinning on us. So you can't have this translating effect that you would with GP lenses, because you know how GP lenses, when you look down, the lens translates up by pushing up with the lower lid. That is not a process that's happening here. So we're definitely looking for simultaneous designs. When we think about simultaneous designs, we always have to remember that this is a brain functioning thing. That's the one thing that we don't have the ability to measure right now, is how does your brain work? How does it interpret these designs? So we have to come up with ways to be able to help ourselves to be able to navigate around the fact that our brain is so much involved in the process of working with multifocals. Okay, so of all the multifocals out there, and this is just a snapshot that Dr. Langis Michaud put together of some of the multifocals that are out there. There's so many out there. Which one is really the best? And there's no way I haven't tried all of these. And I don't think there is a solid answer, because if you don't have the tools to understand how to fit multifocals, none of them are going to work. If you don't have tips up your sleeve of how do I troubleshoot when someone says this is not working, none of these are going to work. So what I'm going to show you is, regardless of which company you're working with, what are your strategies to actually make that multifocal work? Do I work with 5 different types? No. Have I tried a few? Yes. And I'll share with you my keys to make the multifocals that I'm fitting the most successful. So let's dive into a few different of the basic fitting steps. Most important thing whenever I'm doing a scleral lens assessment, I am definitely looking at the eye. I want to make sure that we are cleaning up all of this junk around the eyelids so that none of that is going to interfere with my fit. Whether we're talking about, and I'm talking about a basic scleral lens fitting, this is scleral lens fitting 101. Get this all cleaned up and sorted out before you actually go down the path, because you want to get rid of things that are going to create more complications for you down the road. I really like to get as many baselines as I can before I start any type of scleral lens fitting. The reason for me is I want to be able to track my progress. I want to see if I'm making things better. I don't like to be surprised if something happens where someone says, "Yeah, I'm not seeing so well today." I want to have records to go back to and be able to say, yep, this was there before, or no, this is new. And having those baselines is really important. And I have to remember, because when I have a new patient that comes to me for a fit, I get really excited to do the fit, but I'm like, okay, back it up, make sure you get your baselines, get all the information you need before you dive into doing the fit. When we're talking about multifocal fitting, I like to completely finish a spherical fit first. I want that to be done for a number of different reasons. So regardless of how you fit your lenses, whether it's diagnostic, freeform, whether you're using profilometry, whether you're doing an impression base, finish this step first. And part of the things that you want to do, right, is make sure you don't over minus. You make sure that lens is centered. You've got it to the best centration place that you want. It's not spinning on you. You've got a great fitting lens. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is really important, is if your lens is not stable and you're trying to now put layers of optics on top of it, you're not going to have consistency. So you want to make sure the fit is done right. You want to make sure it's centered. Why is centration is so important? You want the optics to be in the right spot. And remember that a lens that's not centered is not going to feel as comfortable. So use those toric peripheries, use the quads specific designs, and get that lens to be as centered as you can before you move to the next step. Now, at that point, you want to take a pause and you want to reevaluate. Going back a step, when I am starting with my initial assessment, I typically don't necessarily bring up all of the things that I can do with a patient with scleral lenses. I assess how complicated is this fit going to be, and is my goal to get to this point, or is my goal to try and achieve more, whether it is higher order aberrations, multifocal fitting, what is my general plan? And I'm going to discuss with the patient what our options are. I don't always promise them that we're going to get to the point of a multifocal fit because I need to see what initially we're going to do from the get-go. If a patient asks me, hey, does this come in a multifocal? I will also say to them, let's go through the first round of fitting. Let's get you set up with your initial lens, and then let's see how you're doing, and then make some decisions about that going forward. I don't want to overpromise. I don't want to underpromise, but I do want to get some realistic data under my belt of how well they are seeing. What kind of patient are they? Are they someone that gets frustrated easily, or are they more relaxed? I need to understand who they are also before I commit to doing more with them. Okay, so we're done our spherical fit. We've taken a pause, and what are we going to do at this point? We're going to reevaluate. What's their motivation? Are we at a good spot where it's like, okay, let's move forward? Sometimes patients are going to say, yeah, I'm kind of done and I don't want to do anymore. And I'm really happy with the vision I have, and just give me some readers and I'm good to go. Some will say, nope, let's keep going. I want to try and get these multifocals to work. Great. But you have to reassess what's happening at this point. And I like to have this as a break because sometimes what we need to do when we are trying to manage what are their goals with their vision versus what's capable, sometimes we need to use some of our modified mono tricks. Sometimes we may end up with a single vision lens and a multifocal. And when we have those completed lenses, we have something to go back to use. What's really important to understand at this point is, how does your lab handle this transition from, hey, we started with a single vision lens and now we want to switch over to multifocals? What does that mean to the lab? What does that mean in terms of costs? What does your warranty look like? How many redos do you have left? Does that all need to be completed within the initial warranty that you started, or does the warranty start fresh? Right? So understanding what the lab that you're working with, how they handle this transition from single vision to multifocal is really important, because that's going to also define your fitting process. Now, if you talk to someone as experienced as Dr. Christina Sint, she's going to be like, what are you talking about? I go straight right from the beginning. I add everything I need optically, and I'm done my entire fit in 2 fits. I'm not there. That's not where I'm at. And I like to do this for me personally because this is how it works from a payment perspective, from a management perspective, with my patients, with how much time they have. So I have adjusted this process so that it works for the clientele that I have. And you've got to do the same, but understanding how your lab is going to support you and what they need is super important. I really, really want to understand the design that I'm working with, because I think one of the mistakes that we do is we try something with a design and then we're like, you know what, it's not working. Let me jump ship and go to another lens. I think that's a mistake. I think what you need to do is really dive in and really understand, you know, understand the design. What type of lenses are we working with? Center near, center distance? Can I play with both? Do I have the ability to modify the optic zone? What type of a multifocal are we dealing with? A spherical, aspheric? Are we dealing with ring design? Are we dealing with combos? Are we on the front or the back surface? Really understand what is the design, so that way you have more opportunities to make changes when you're troubleshooting, or at least follow along with your lab consultant when you're working with them, so that when they say, hey, we're going to do this and this, you're not just blindly saying, okay, go ahead, do it. You're saying, yeah, I understand what you're doing and we're working together to make this work. What that does for you, it allows you to be thinking about everything you've learned in your exam, plus everything you learned with the patient, and you've come up with a game plan of, this is what I think I would do. And then you can work with a consultant to say, hey, what do you think about this? It ends up reducing the number of redos you need to do, instead of always just feeding the information to the consultant, because the consultant only has as much information as you give them, and you are definitely going to have more information. Okay, so how do you design the lens? Now you've got to understand this. What is the process that the lab wants you to work with? Do they want this to be all computerized? Do they want it to be empirically done? Do they want topographies? Do they want photos? What information do they want to help you build this lens? You've got to find out from them. And some of the things that they're going to ask for is a sphericil over refraction. super important that you don't over minus people, right? When we think about multifocal designs and think about all that's happening, if you over minus them and you over plus them in the reading, you're going to end up with more rings in that lens design than you need. So you want the least possible. So do a great refraction, do a binocular buildup or a binocular balance and a plus buildup to make sure you have the least amount of minus. One of the things that I try and avoid is having too much astigmatism in the correction. So I don't like to play around with front torics if I don't have to. It changes your setup of your lens. It may cause the lens to drop a little more and decenter. It may cause optically things to work or not work. So what I always do is I make sure that whatever I find behind my phoropter, I'm going to show it to our patient in free space with a flipper, and I'm going to show them both the actual prescription and I'm going to show them the spherical equivalent. You'd be surprised how many times people are going to choose the spherical equivalent and say, yeah, I don't really like that other option, which is the astigmatism correction. When you do have astigmatism, you've got to find out, does your lab allow you to do a front toric and a multifocal? Sometimes you're going to have to say, I can only do one or the other. And it's a really important piece to know about the lens that you're working with so that you don't get to this point and go, oh no, I can't do a front toric with a multifocal. Now what do I do? Right? So you want to know that information beforehand. Also, make sure that you look at your flexing and are you inducing astigmatism based on the way the lenses actually fit? We're going to talk about flexing a little bit more. When we talked about this, when I said when you're determining the ad power, make sure you figure out the least amount of ad that you need so that again you're not unnecessarily putting more layers into the optics of the lens than you need to. And really make sure you think about the patient. What is it that their goals are? Our goals are always we want them to be perfect, right? But that's not realistic. What do they want out of their lenses? What are they trying to achieve? What are their rules in terms of work? And where are the different situations that they're saying, this is where I want that multifocal help? Because if we don't know that piece, we're going to strive for perfection where they may not be needing that. They may need something completely different. So really understanding, are they looking for more distance support? Are they looking for more intermediate or more reading? So it gives you a little bit of wiggle room when you can't get that perfect. All ranges of vision is 20/20. What are my options and what am I leading towards? And it's what did you want initially? So let me work towards that. So when we think about residual astigmatism, we think about flexing. One of the things that I always do is I look at K's over top of our lenses. Now, we should have a balanced K reading, 42 by 42. If I've got 42 by 45, that means I have induced 3 diopters of astigmatism because that front curvature of all the lenses we receive, they're not toric, they are spherical. So if you're getting a toric reading over top with your keratometer, that's telling you that, hey, you've squished the lens somewhere to cause a bend in the lens, which is causing that lens to induce 3 diopters of astigmatism. So you've got to go back to your edge design and say, hey, where am I too tight? Where do I need to relax this so that my front curve balances out? It's important as part of the first steps in the initial fitting before I get to a multifocal to figure this out to make sure that I'm not unnecessarily adding more astigmatism to the system. When we are ordering things empirically, the things that the lab will want to know is eye dominance, and we'll all agree in the contact lens world that sensory dominance is what we want. Pupil size is super important because all the optics that we are going to put need to go inside that pupil. So you need to know how big that pupil is. And there's a lot of different ways for you to measure it. One of the things that I like to do is I like to check pupil sizes in both different settings with bright lights and with dim lights. Again, to give our lab as much information to help me design these multifocals. You send all in the info to the lab. And one of the other things that I like to do is also to take slit lamp images of the eye and send them to them. So in case there's something that the lab consultants are seeing that I'm not, I just want to give them a full picture of, hey, this is what I'm looking at. Because as they're designing a lens for us, they might say, oh, I wonder what that lid position is like, or I wonder if that pupil is perfectly round, or is it oval, or is it sitting high, or how big is. they can have those images to look back on. One of the things that I want you to think about is we have a lot of equipment in our offices, and we 1,000% do not know all of the capabilities of every single one of our instruments. I brought in a piece of equipment that I brought in for myopia management to look at axial length measurements. And what I ended up finding is, oh my God, it has all of these cool features to measure pupil sizes and to look at different aspects of the eye that's actually helping me with my contact lens fitting. And I was not expecting that. So this is kind of a reminder to say, hey, go around and play around with your equipment and see what else it does beyond the one thing or the two things that you actually bought it for, because you might be surprised at what else is hidden in those tools that weren't brought up in those initial conversations when you bought your equipment. When you dispense the lens, just like when dispensing multifocal lenses, soft multifocal lenses, you got to give people time to adjust to them, right? Remember, this is a brain thinking process, and not everyone is going to get simultaneous right away. They need time to adjust to it and let your patients know. Just like I need you to have some time to get used to your new lenses, I need you to have time to get used to these new optics, and make sure that you talk to them about the time that it takes, because I hate getting those phone calls like 2 hours later. Yeah, the lenses aren't working. It's like, dude, you've only had them for 2 hours. Call me back in 2 weeks. Let me know how things are going. But if I didn't talk about that before they left, they don't know how long they should be expecting things to adjust, right? I also like to have a conversation before they leave about how do you think your vision is right now? And just get an idea of how are things going right now? If it's terrible, then I'm not going to dispense those lenses, because I'm going to end up, going down a path of you're not happy the moment you left it in my office. It's just going to stir and get fester. So I might do some troubleshooting then. That's usually not the case. Typically, it's, yeah, this is pretty good. And we talk about just giving yourself time to get used to the optics. I also do talk to them about this being a visual process, a brain incorporated process, and that it does take time for you to get used to this lens. So they have a good understanding and a good expectation of what to expect before we even start fitting these lenses. When we bring them back for the follow-up, definitely want to check vision. We want to set the right expectations, just like we do with soft lenses. Make sure you have the lights on. And then comes now the tricky part when, you got to ask, how are things going, right? One of the things that I had to stop my staff from doing when they do their intake of case history was, asking all the negative questions. What's not working? What don't you like? And I said, guys, we've got to flip that, right? Because they're going to start looking for all these type of problems. But I want to know, hey, are you happy? Are you happy with how you're seeing? I want to get that out first. And the reason for it is sometimes patients are going to be like, yeah, I'm so happy. This is working great. Great. That is your indicator that, hey, you don't need to do a lot of work. But if you don't ask that question and all you ask is, what's wrong? What can we fix? What is the problem? Then they're just going to start thinking, okay, well, should I have a problem? Well, let me give you a problem because you're asking me the question because you don't think it should be good enough. So maybe we should keep going. And you can end up spiraling trying to chase an artificial problem that they're giving you. So make sure you ask all the positive stuff first and ask if they're happy. All right, so let's dive into some of this troubleshooting. One of the things is vision is not clear. I want you to make sure you double check that the lens came back like the one that you initially ordered. So when you have your single vision lens, and let's say you've made 2 iterations, so you have your lens 1, 2, and 3, and you said to the lab, you know what, I actually am building off of lens 2, and that's what I want my multifocal to be built off of. I want to make sure that the lens that came is exactly the same as the lens that you ordered. Because what if accidentally they built off of lens 3? That's a problem, right? So you got to make sure that that single vision lens and the multifocal lens fits the same. They shouldn't come back complaining about comfort. The lens shouldn't have dropped. It shouldn't be fitting differently, because if you've perfected your fit with that scleral lens in the spherical component of this, it should come back fitting the way, and you should just have the layers of multifocal added to it. Okay. Make sure you've given them enough time to adapt, and make sure they do understand how simultaneous vision works. If you have an issue with the distance vision, One thing I want you to remember, no matter what type of multifocal lens that you are using, the moment you put a multifocal lens on top of a patient, you induce more aberrations. Okay, compared to a single vision lens, when you've got those extra layers of multifocal layers of prescription, you are inducing more aberrations, right? So a single vision lens will never look as crisp as a multifocal lens. And so there is this expectation that I have that, you know what, we might lose a little bit of vision in the distance. Is it because of those inherent aberrations that I've created by trying to get someone to go from single vision to simultaneous vision? Maybe. Is it that I put too much add in? Or is it that they're just not someone that can adapt to simultaneous vision? Same is true for the reverse. If we're having near issues, did I give enough add? Is the add in the right spot? Are they adjusting to simultaneous vision? This is what we have to be thinking about is what is the reason why we're not getting the vision that we want? And we start diving in. Oftentimes with soft multifocals, they say, two eyes together, don't do binocular checks. I do like to do monocular checks because I really want to know what's happening with each individual eye. I want to check both eyes in the distance and up close, and I want to check monocular vision with both eyes because one lens might be the problem and the other one is great. And the one it's the problem, it's in the dominant eye that's actually overshadowing everything else that's going on. And if I just fix the one eye, maybe that'll balance things out. So really understanding what's happening with each individual eye, I think it's important. I will also do over refractions, both binocular and monocular, to see what can I push? Where is there room to give, right? I will do a sphericell over refraction. Did those aberrations from that multifocal actually create more astigmatism that's coming through that they needed or not? Again, we're looking for data that we can use to try and figure out how do we improve this optically. You can be creative with the add power. Now, this goes back to the design. Do you have a center distance design, a center near design? Do you have both? Can you play around with these designs to give you the best possible outcome, right? How dominant is one eye? This you will learn as you go through your fitting process of your patient. Can you put half a diopter on and everything is ruined? Or do you put two diopters in front of them and they're like, between the two eyes, I don't really notice that much of a difference. As you start testing for dominance, you'll really start to see how dominant is someone because that's going to play a role into how much add can I push on this eye before it starts to say, no, that's too much. Obviously, you can start playing around with more add in one eye, less in the other, right? All the things that we play around with when we think about soft multifocals, those same things apply here as well. But the key for me with this is really understanding the level of dominance that someone has because that's going to have an impact on, again, how much add can I push over someone's eye. And again, don't forget the modified monovision. Remember, we have our single vision set that's still there, that's working. And maybe with one eye being so dominant, we do need to go back to a single vision because even a low add is throwing off the optics too much for that person to handle. So keep that in mind about the modified monovision. Now, customizing the optic zone, when I think about this, I think of our lab when we're telling them, hey, this is what's happening with our patient. Help me figure out this multifocal. They're going to be thinking about pupil size and they're going to be thinking about the optic zone. Sometimes they will say, let us figure it out. Or they will say, you know what, here's the standard size. You can adjust it. Or they'll say, you know what, you have full reign. Move that optic zone in or out as much as you like. Go ahead, tell us what you want us to do. Now, when you play around with the optic zone, there's a lot of different things that we can do, right? Is it a center near design or is it center distance? Okay, center near, you've got near in the center and you've got distance on the periphery, right? Distance to near. So when we talk about adjusting that zone, we're making either smaller and squishing everything in, we're making bigger and spreading things out. It's all relative to the pupil because all of that has to fit within the pupil. So if you've got a small pupil and a large optic zone in a center near design, you're only getting near through that pupil. So you've got to shrink that optic zone to bring the distance in so that the distance prescription is coming into the pupil. Flip it around completely. If you have center distance and near on the edge, so near all the way to distance, you've got a small pupil and only the pupil is seeing through the distance piece. Again, you've got to shrink that in. The reverse, if you've got a large pupil and a really small optic zone, it's not balanced either. You can open up that optic zone to match that larger pupil, right? Also think if that pupil is large, you might get some distortions from the peripheral curves. So you want to make sure your optic zone goes past the size of the pupil. So lots of different ways that you can play around with bringing it in, enlarging it, and just thinking through what design do I have? How dominant is this eye? Is this my distance eye or my near eye? What design do I have? And am I not getting enough reading? Do I want to try and bring the reading zone in? If I'm not getting enough distance, do I want to bring the distance zone in? And you can start to play around with it. You may not know exactly how much you want to do with that, but at least you're thinking about the optic zone. And you can have a conversation with your lab consultant and say, hey, you know what? My pupil's really big. Should we be thinking about the optic zone? Right? To guide them as well. And so you can have good conversations with them. Also remember, most of our fitting sets come with a standard base curve. And what's being adjusted these days is just the sagittal height. So we've got our main curve here and the lens is being up or down is being moved. But you can change that base curve to play around with the power. If you flatten the base curve, you're going to need to add more plus to the system, which could be helpful. If you steepen that base curve, you're going to have to add more minus to the system, which could also be helpful. Do I advise that you do all of these changes all in one round? No. I think you should, especially when we're learning about a particular lens, you play around with one variable at a time so you can see how is that impactful. If you play around and you make 3 changes, then you're looking at and saying, okay, it didn't work. What part do you remove? What part do you adjust next, right? So I like to work with my consultants when it comes to working with multifocals, knowing the design, knowing what I'm thinking, and we work together to kind of come up with a treatment plan. So here, right, leading to that is these are the people that, we rely on. I remember there was a lab consultant that I had spent years and years working with, and I actually had never met him in person. And I swear the first time we saw each other in person, we were like running to each other like best friends that had never met. And we just hugged, and I was like, you look nothing like what I would thought you would. And it was just so nice to see the person that had helped me with so many of my fits. The other tip with working with consultants is when they are invested in your fit, if you run out of time with your warranty, they're in it. They're like, okay, I think we just need one more lens and we're going to get there. If you've gone past your warranty and now you're like, oh, I need some help, and then you call the consultant, it's kind of like, well, it's a different scenario. You're asking for a favor versus from the get-go, you guys are working on this together. Multifocal scleral lenses have fitting guides. We don't talk enough about them, but there are fitting guides out there as well that will help you guide you through this process. So one of the things that kind of goes back to that question about, are you happy? If we are constantly chasing perfection, we're going to let our patients down. And so I want to set realistic expectations until I really know more about the patient and what can I possibly achieve. And remember, the goal is to meet most of your needs most of the time. Like these are really important things to say. And you may need to have to give up a little bit of crispness to have all the freedom of not having glasses. And it's okay to say, you know what? This is the best that we're going to be able to do right now. And that's okay. I don't want you to feel like if it's not perfect, we failed. Because if you have that impression, then your patients are going to have that impression. So make sure you are feeling good about how far you've come. And if you can't get to that very last stretch, that's okay. That's really, really okay. I want to go through a couple of cases with you. So I had this one patient, she's 62-year-old female. She started being seen in the clinic back in 1988. I didn't take over for the clinic until 2008, so that's when I started seeing her. Complete dry eye patient, so much drama, like we threw everything at her, and I really wanted her to fit with her with scleral lenses, and she just was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm too nervous, I'm too scared. Insertion removal was her biggest fear, like so many patients. Finally, she let me, fit her, and the first lens that we fit her in was an MSD. This did not have a multifocal at the time. But that was the first lens years ago that we fit her with. And then we jumped over to the one fit lenses. And so what I did was with her, and the reason why we went to the one fit was because that had a multifocal design that we could dive into with a little bit more customization, newer design than the MSD. So I optimized the single vision lens first, and we went forward with it, got it nice and stable, nice and comfortable. And when I first fit her with this lens, we didn't have the multifocal at the time. So I just went with readers over top. It took us 3 lenses to fit this lens. And she was like, great, I'm happy. It was better than the MSD. She was more comfortable. She was seeing well. We were using readers over top. We're good to go. Now an evolution happened again where now the one fit lenses could have multifocals in them. So I said, Susan, we're going to go to the next step and I'm going to try the next thing for you. And we're going to try with multifocal lenses. So she's now on board, found out her right eye is dominant. I didn't need to do anything to the fit because the fit was really good. This particular lens had an N&D lens design, and I worked with the optic zone to adjust to her pupils. But it wasn't that great. I didn't get her to the end point that we both wanted. And I had to go back in her right eye to the spherical lens because no matter what I tried, and I tried 3 different iterations, I couldn't get her right lens to work so that she was getting distance and reading out of it. Just couldn't get it. And no matter what I tried, we just weren't there. So we ended up keeping the spherical lens in the right eye, and we ended up doing a front toric and lens in her non-dominant eye, which was the left eye, in the multifocal. So we had a modified monovision setup, and for those occasional times when she needed more reading support, we put readers on top. It drove me crazy that why wouldn't it work? Why was the left lens so easy that it just worked nicely? And why was this right lens not working? And then there was another evolution in multifocal lenses, and this was about optics and decentering optics. And we started talking about misaligned optics. We have natural misalignments, and this is where the line of sight and the geometric center of the cornea do not line up. And we see this when we are looking with topographers and our staff are doing topographies and they say, okay, we want you to look one line over, look one ring over to the right, and now look one ring up or one ring down. They're not lined up. They're naturally misaligned. That's why we are having to adjust them to get our topographies that we need. And I started looking at people, whether they were contact lens wearers or not, and I started looking at them and saying, gosh, what's going on? Let me look at their pupils. And I was like, oh my goodness, all of these pupils are sitting up and nasal. Why are they all up and nasal? If they're not perfectly centered, they're up and nasal. And then what do we know about scleral lenses? We know that scleral lenses tend to sit down and out. So if you've got lenses that are sitting down and out and their pupils that are sitting up and in, gosh, our optics are not in the right spot. And so we talked about natural misalignment. We can see it on topography. You can see it behind a slit lamp. You can look and you can clearly see the difference here of, okay, we're not centered. And I completely missed this with Susan. I didn't see it. And so once I knew that this was an option, I went back to Susan and I looked at her and I said, oh my God, I think this is what's going to fix your right eye. So going back a little bit about the natural decentration of the lenses, what do we know about the sclera? We know that the nasal side is flatter and higher, and we know that the temporal side is steeper and lower, which causes that natural inferior temporal decentration. We also know that closer to the limbus, the tissue is tougher. Further away from the limbus, the tissue is more spongier, as I like to say, right? So when you have a small lens designed, it's not dealing with such of a spongier tissue. So the lens will be more centered, but the larger the lens that you go, it's now going to be sitting on a spongier tissue. You're going to need more toric peripheries, quad specific designs, and the greater likelihood of larger lenses to decentered is there. And it's something to remember when you're fitting these lenses. Now, we can see this with toric peripheral curves and quad specific curves. Like if you look at this image right here, you can see that this lens is decentered. And then when we adjust things and get the lens centered, you've got a better centration. Why is that important? Is because the optics are in the center of the lens. And if your lens is decentered, the optics are not in the right spot. That goes back to the very first thing about you need to finish your spherical fit, and they have to be as well centered as they can. Because when you have decentered optics, it's going to create more aberrations. It's going to create prismatic effect. It's going to create halos and ghosting. So make sure you look at the lens, whether it's through the slit lamp or at your OCT images. Do I have this prismatic tear film? That is telling me that my lens is decentered. I need to get this into the right spot. It's a really, really important piece because that's what actually was needed for Susan. How do you measure this decentration? You can use your slit lamp. You can use reticles. There are lenses that will look at that natural misalignment and you can plot it out. There are online calculators where you can take an image of the eye and then look at those rings and then say, okay, let me plot this into a calculator, calculate how much of decentration I have. Lots of different programs. One of those instruments that I was telling you about that I had in the office actually does the calculation for me, and it tells me exactly how high and how over am I and how much misalignment that I have that I can share with the lab so that I can calculate and redesign the lenses with this decentration. And what actually happens is the lenses are then the optical zones are now moved to where the pupil is sitting. And it's incredible that this can happen and that we can do this, but it's really important that you take a look at it. And when you have a patient, right from the beginning, take a look at where their pupil is sitting and look for misalignment. And remember what I said is one of the things that I like to do is I like to take a photograph of that lens and the eye and everything is there so that if I miss it, the lab consultant can say, hey, did you notice there was a little bit of misalignment here? The lens is sitting a little low or the pupil is a little high. We're going to have to adjust these optics. So those photographs are very helpful. This, Susan, was my very first decentered optics case that I did. And once I moved the optics into the right spot, I didn't change her fit because it was as centered as I was going to be able to get her, but I did move the optics to where her pupil was, and that's what did it. And so I didn't change the left, I just adjusted the right with the optics, center distance, and moved them into the right spot, and that's what made her work, and now she no longer needs reading glasses. I'm going to go over one more case with you. A 58-year-old Yola, keratoconic patient wearing GPs, so uncomfortable with her lenses. Guys, we have all of those patients. And then we put a scleral lens on her and she was just like, oh my God, this is so comfortable. Why didn't I do this sooner? Right? So now we put her into a single vision lens and she said, hey guys, why is my GP lenses sharper than these scleral lenses? I thought these scleral lenses are supposed to be amazing. Why are my GPs sharper? And it puzzled me for a little bit and I was stumped. I'm like, why are you seeing better with your GPs than your scleral lenses? And then I started to understand more about higher order aberrations. And what was happening is her GP lenses were causing compression onto her front cornea, which was actually getting rid of some of our higher order aberrations. So higher order aberrations come from the front of the lens, the front of the cornea, the back of the cornea, and the internal intraocular lens itself. And making sure that if you are going down that path is that you understand that when we do these calculations, we need a device that's going to measure all of these pieces all together because that's going to give us a solid number of the entire system. If you have an instrument that's only measuring the front of the eye, you're not getting the full picture. But in Yola's case, what was happening is that cornea was getting rid of some of that corneal GP was getting rid of some of that aberrations on the front cornea. So what I did was I started looking at her HOA values and I said, okay, what do we have? Well, with the scleral lens on, her HOA RMS value was a 1.2 and a 1.18. Okay, well, what do those numbers mean? It's basically taking all the aberrations of the eye and giving it a nice little number that we look at and to help us figure out what are we supposed to do with these numbers. Anything above a 0.4 is where I'll start to think about, hey, maybe you have aberrations that we need to be thinking about. 0.4 is my benchmark. If you're under 0.4, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get you any better. But she also needed a multifocal. So when we fit her with multifocals and we put multifocals on her, her RMS value actually got worse, right? Because one of the things that I said is when you put a multifocal on an eye, you're inducing more aberration. So her RMS values jumped because now we have more layers of prescription and her brain is going, yeah, I don't like this, right? So now we've induced more aberration. So I'm like, okay, if we want to give you a multifocal, your vision has now just gone down from your GP lenses. I've made it even worse. I'm trying to help you do better. So what we ended up doing was using HOA optics. We didn't actually have to decenter her because she was quite centered, but we used HOA optics in addition to the multifocals. General rule of thumb is when you are fitting someone with HOA optics, I never promise them that that number that they have, I'm going to be able to bring it down to a 0.4 or lower. My goal is trying to bring it down by 50%. If I can get 50%, that's great. Because of all the people that are doing HOA optics across the country, 40 to 65% ish is what we're finding we can improve that number. We're never going to get rid of all of them, but we can improve them. And when we added HOA optics plus her multifocal into this lens, we ended up reducing her RMS values to 0.45 and 0.56. That's huge for her. And she was like, I don't know what you did, but I can now see up close. I've got the benefits of the multifocal, and it's better vision than what my GP lenses were giving me. So we ended up having from about a 68% improvement in her RMS values from the multifocals and 62 from the spherical lenses, and 59 in the left eye for the multifocals and 53% from the spherical lenses. Remember, we had more aberrations in the multifocal than we did the single vision lenses. Okay, so some general tips when it comes to HOA lens fitting, and like this is a whole course in itself, is about right expectations, looking at those RMS valuations, good conversations. I think what's really important for me is picking the right candidates. I want to make sure I set really, really good expectations. I really understand what HOA optics are all about and how I go through the fitting process. I did a lot of knowledge-based learning before I went down this path because you can spin your wheels a lot if you're not doing it correctly. And it all starts with a really good, stable, single vision lens that you start with, right? Think about what we're doing. We're adding this complex optics on top of a lens. And if that lens is rotating and spinning, we're going to create a mess for ourselves. So happy to chat more about this with you guys if you'd like. In summary, when we think about multifocals, right, what we want to do is fit that spherical part first, good centration, good comfort, good distance, pause, do a reevaluation, check motivation, because any step that you are doing now from here is going to be a higher cost as well. So patients need to make sure that they are ready from a time commitment and a cost perspective to go to the multifocal or to go to the HOA lens. Some patients right from the beginning will be like, take all my money, we're going to do everything. It doesn't matter how long it takes, no problem. But not everyone is like that. People will want to sort of go step by step. And again, it's based on your clientele and how you work and how, your dynamics of your clinics work. Understand the lens really well, understand your lab partners, what their expectations of you, and how can you guys work together. You have lots of ways to troubleshoot the lens. Don't forget about the different ways, thinking about the residual astigmatism, thinking about the pupil size, thinking about checking monocular VAs. Be creative with the optic zone and add powers. Remember to match what you're trying to achieve with what their goals are. Think about decentered optics, think about higher order aberrations, and really, really be very communicative with your patients so that you set a lot of good explanations. Got a couple more minutes here, and I want to just talk about how important communication is. I think it's the most important thing that we do when it comes to fitting multifocals. It's more important than you having all of the high tech and having all of the best piece of equipment. And this is the most important thing because you are setting your patient up for success or failure based on how you talk to them. And I think communication is the foundation from which we build trust, we build understanding, and we get success. Whatever part of the clinic that we are talking about, I think this is really important, and we don't pay enough attention to how important it is. Guys, one of the things that we do is we refract to 20 feet away and we give people these super sharp prescriptions, and then we ask them to sit in front of devices all day, or their job requires that. And one of the things when it comes to presbyopia is that I've stopped blaming age as a reason for why presbyopia is happening. I'm talking about it very much so from a functional standpoint with respect to how we are using our eyes. We are accommodating all day long, and our systems are fatiguing a lot more. So I've taken out that voice of let's talk about age. I've talked more sooner about the impacts of devices and how it's affecting our focusing system. So that way, this isn't a shock to our system later on in life. And, when we think about presbyopia and how we explain it, like when you're in school, you're taught about, it's about getting older and it's about aging. And my crowd did not want to handle that at all. They would, in the beginning, when I started talking about, well, this is part of your life when you're getting older and this is a condition that's happening, they would break down. I'm like, God, in school, my patients weren't crying in my chair. Why are my patients crying in my chair? I had to learn another way to describe presbyopia. And what I did was I came up with this system of 10. And what the system of 10 is when you think about a full presbyope, they have a plus 250 add power. And if we break that down into quarter diopter steps, we have 10 steps of change that are going to change. We're going to lose those 10 steps of energy, as I call it. So I talk about the accommodative system as this reservoir of energy that we have that we are depleting over time. And a big push for that depletion is fact of all the digital devices that we are using. But I use that to help people understand where they are in presbyopia, what is presbyopia, and I don't use the word presbyopia ever. I'm just talking about this reservoir of energy. So let me give you an example. If a patient is presbyopic and they have a +1 add in this system of 10, they're actually at level 4. They've lost 4 quarter diopter steps. They have 6 more remaining natural units in natural units remaining, which means that they're going to have 6 more glasses changes. They need 4 units of magnification to get up to full potential. And I explain this process to them so they really understand how many more glasses iterations are going to happen. How long is this going to keep going on? And when is this going to stop? Am I going to end up getting, lose my vision at the end of this? But this process helps me explain to them what they're going through, where they are. And now I have patients coming back and say, hey, doc, last year I was at level 4. I think I'm at level 5. I think there's a shift. So they understand what's going on. And it's been really helpful with my multifocal fitting to be able to explain that. When we talk about the differences between progressives and multifocals, we know that progressives are linear and multifocals are circular. I can explain simultaneous vision using these circular patterns and also describing what is actually happening. If you're a 150 add, you're at level 6. I need to give you 6 units of magnification. And what that's going to look like is distance at the top, distance plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in your reading glasses, so they can understand what a progressive is. They understand what a multifocal is because I can draw that for them, and everything clicks for them. And that communication makes my fitting process easier because they're following along a little bit better with what's actually happening. And when I'm making changes to the lenses, what am I doing? I'm moving those ring patterns in and out ever so slightly so simultaneous vision can catch, right? So it's all about working with the brain, working with the design, and working with the patient to make sure that they follow along with what's going on. I really think it's important to start early because that makes things very, very helpful for you. And just to reiterate, communication is so, so important. I think it's the basis of a good multifocal fit because it really sets good expectations, helps your patients to understand what you are doing, what you're trying to achieve, and how the brain fits into all of this in terms of really why is this a little bit more of a complex and not so simple like we've done in the past where I needed a -2 and you just gave me a -2 and that really worked. All right, I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for your attention. And